And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. I got it right this time. I know Doc's listening. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let first we're doing a fireside chat, and I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves. So we're going to start, Brady Bunch squares, and we're going to start with you, Griff. So can you tell our listeners and viewers who you are?
So I'm Griffin Barber. I write science fiction, fantasy, and a little bit of horror. I've been privileged to write a couple of noirish tales, both on my own and with Casey Azell, who's done some amazing work with editing anthologies and producing those anthologies for Baen Books. And I've been lucky enough to be in those as well. I'm a huge fan of noir in general. LA Confidential, one of my favorite films. Mulholland Falls, same thing. And then some of the more older films as well, that The Third Man, that kind of thing. So I really enjoy the genre and hope to be able to make a few additions to the discussion tonight.
All right. And then next, we've got Miss Hinckley Correa. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Hi, I'm Hinckley Correa. I write sci-fi and fantasy, and I've written one short story for the Noir Fatale anthology because I really like noir. And then,
All right. You got to start somewhere. So last but not least, we have Miss Casey Azell.
Hi.
Can you introduce?
Yes, I can introduce myself. I'm Casey Azell. I write science fiction, fantasy, and noir. Like Griffin said, I have been very fortunate to edit two really awesome noir anthologies that came out from Baen. The first one was Noir Fatale, and it focused on the character archetype of the femme fatale in noir and science fiction and fantasy, kind of a mashup type situation. And then the second one that just came out in September is No Game for Knights, and that one focuses on the character archetype of the noir detective, because we got to do like the whole equal time thing, right? Give the dudes their day in the sun. And that one was also just a ton of fun. And I was very, very fortunate to receive stories from both Griffin and Hinckley for the first one, from Griffin from the second one. And spoiler alert, there will be a third one. And there are stories from Griffin and Hinckley's over there. This is fun. Okay. Hinckley's over there in the third one as well. So look for that coming from Baen Books in the future.
Outstanding. So Doc would call you genre fluid because you never stay in one place for very long. Yeah. It's like you have project ADD and you just like, oh, shiny new thing over here.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then as a point of order, I believe it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. You're having fun, right?
Yeah.
So as a quick point of order, you did say day in the sun, and I thought the sun didn't shine in noir.
Oh no, it does, because otherwise how do you get those beautiful shadows that like run across a woman's face?
Oh, this is true. It's true. You beat me with science. That's cheating. All right. And if you haven't guessed, dear listener, the topic today was brought to you by the urging of our current guest, Mr. Griffin Barber, because we're going to talk about all things noir, because he's absolutely in love with the topic. So to get this started, and then feel free to like run with the ball and steal the mic. I'm okay with that. Do you think noir is a genre, a subgenre, or just an aesthetic?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It actually ticks all of those boxes, I think. Historically, it came about as a film genre in post-war Europe and somewhat in the States, but mostly in French cinema, where they had no budget. So they had, to make a set work or make a location work, one light, that was it. Work with what you got. One light, one camera. And it became a very much an aesthetic that has informed everything that's come after that. And there was always, usually it was a minimalist cast as well, and kind of. I just love it. I love it. And yes, I think it's all three of those things. And that's one of the reasons why the anthologies that Casey put together work so well, is because it's very fluid. You can go ahead and, we had everything from urban fantasy, high fantasy, science fiction, near, hard science fiction. All of these things are available in the noir genre, and crime stuff, and a ghost story. Which is what Hinckley did. So, I mean, it's all possible. So, yeah, I think it's all of the above.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Griffin said about it. It can be all of the above, right? I had Mona Lisa Foster is another author, and she was asking me about this one time. And she said, so is it just like a skin where, as long as you include the noir elements, does that make it a noir story? And not necessarily. However, if you don't include those elements, I would argue it isn't a noir story, because it is as much about the aesthetic of the light and shadow, the metaphor of the shadowy side of society, and the literal shadow, as in something is blocking the light, and it's as much about that as it is about the characters and the plot and the mystery and the search for the truth, as the story goes along. But what really, in my mind, what really makes it a noir story is that it has to have that feel, that essence. It has to be somewhat like cynically hopeful, I guess, is kind of how I think of it, in that it doesn't necessarily have a happy ending, but it has an ending that isn't soul crushing, even in defeat, if that makes sense. And I think that's what I love about it, because, I don't think, maybe I'm a cynical person. I don't know. I have a tendency sometimes to be pretty cynical, but I try to always remain hopeful as well, that, humanity is essentially good and people are not all jerks, and the future is not bleak, like unrelentingly. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I love about the genre as a whole. So yeah, I call it a genre, when taken as a whole, when you look at all of the stories together. But it's also a cool subgenre in that, like Griffin said, it mashes up really well with almost any other genre. I mean, I've seen, and you've seen, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but you've all seen this movie, a fantastic noir children's story in the form of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It hits all of the notes, and it's a kid's story, and it's a cartoon, and it's fantastic. So yeah, so it's a genre. They're a genre taken as a whole. They can be a subgenre in that they can be mashed up, and it's an aesthetic too, because of the very visual and visually informed elements that so often show up to great effect in those stories.
I think it's both, to be honest, if that makes sense, where it's, if you have noir with all of like the tropes, but you don't have like the aesthetic, that it's just kind of a mystery. But if you have like the noir aesthetic without any of like the tropes and the stories, it's just kind of pedantic.
Dark. Yeah. Yeah. You said
bonus
that
points, because pedantic is one of my favorite words. I mean, that's always a win. So do you have a preference with it as its own genre, standalone, as a skin for other kinds of stories, or as an aesthetic? Like, do you, as a creative yourself who are writing stories in the space, do you have a preference?
I mean, I like to mash it up. I do. I mean, obviously I do. If I've, edited now going on 3 anthologies that are noir mashups, because it does play so nicely with other genres, I think. So I guess I think that's probably, personally in my own work, I think that's probably my preference, is how can I take a story that is a science fiction or a fantasy story and give it that noir edge, right? introduce the shadow into it, make it dark, make it gritty, but also still hopeful at the same time.
Well, and I don't know about the hopeful thing, but what I do know is that the protagonists or even the antagonists are interested in doing it despite the consequence.
Yeah.
They're adhering to their own code,
right?
And regardless of the effing cost to them and to society, it's because their code is what counts. It's one of the things that's also kind of cool about it is that it lends itself very strongly to either very close third person or first person narrative.
That's a really good point, and one that I didn't think about but I think that's probably one of the reasons why I also, like it really, the genre really vibes with me, is because I do write in very close point of view, and I'm always trying to get, further behind the eyes of my character. And so, and I mean, you see it in, it's like, and that, it's like, the old Spencer for Hire TV show where you have like the voiceover of Spencer's like thought process, being able to like hear that when you're writing something or when you're reading something, I think is very cool.
Yeah, that was one of the things too, is that when you look at the across the genres and things like that, I mean, between the two anthologies, I wrote a high fantasy story about a necromancer conducting a heist. And Casey's story in the first one was post World War II. No, World War. I can't remember now. Your story in the first one.
Futuristic World War, yeah.
Yeah, futuristic World War post thing for that, and then Hinckley's was a ghost story and set in Japan, and I'm not really even sure about the era.
It's gonna be like 10 minutes in the future, 5 minutes in the future.
Yeah, so right there, just between the three of us in the one book, in the one anthology, we had three different, vastly different settings.
Mm-hmm.
Where they all worked, and they all were suitable to the genre because they fit, and they also had different protagonists. In that particular instance, we had for the Noir Fatale, we had the Femme Fatale was the one character we kind of should have included in that process, and we all had three very different female Femme Fatales. So it's pretty cool the things you can do with it. You can have horror that's noir, all sorts of really fascinating stuff that you can play around with.
Do you mind if I ask Hinckley a question real quick? I've actually been wondering this for a reason.
Not at all.
And now I kind of have her captive. So one of the things that I loved so much about your story in Noir Fatale was that it was a Japanese ghost story. And it really illustrates to me some of the versatility of the genre, like we were talking about. Griffin said it originated in France in film, thus, the noir literally means like black or dark in French, right? So there's the European influence. We've got obviously a lot of American cultural influence, but it worked really well in this sort of Japanese cultural mythology. What made you think of that, and why did it feel noir to you, I guess?
Well, my thing is I'm an anime nerd, so Japan is kind of a cool location for me, but then you get into like some of the stuff and it just works really well for noir. Like if you read stuff about Tokyo, it's like there's some wild stuff that goes there where it's like super modern that fits super well within the like genre. Mm-hmm. And then so there's like, because the ghost is something that's like an actual like Japanese ghost story, and it fits with the whole femme fatale thing, and it fits and it like already fits the tropes, and it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, fully agree. it was very cool for me, having read that story, to then move to Japan and live there and kind of get immersed a little bit in Japanese culture and folklore. And the more I learned, the more I agree with you. Yeah, there's something about, if I can make a generalization here, and I know how dangerous those can be, but if I can make a generalization here, there's something about Japanese culture, pop culture, like the mythos that they create, that I think works very well with that whole light and shadow duality of,
Well,
because they love, cute animated characters. They're everywhere, but they also are really into, like, really dark and brooding, emotional heroes,
Oftentimes in the same thing.
Yeah. And sometimes they're the
well,
same.
and that it feeds into that code of conduct, the selfless devotion to something other than yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It works very well with Bushido, 100%. Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that.
Well, and that's part of the reason why I think that the Japanese are huge fans of noir as well.
Yeah.
Like they it's one of those niches that they enjoy. So
we need a new word, like noirname. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of anime titles that totally fit the genre, totally fit the aesthetic, totally fit the mood and the vibe and
Well, like even like some of the most famous ones, like stuff like Cowboy Bebop, is just like slightly lighter noir.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other aspect of it too, and one of the things that any culture that has kind of gone through the things that theirs has, and they will develop an ethos or a mythos around certain figures that rebel against society, but only so much.
Yeah,
right? They're still identifiable as a member of that society, and in particular when it comes to like criminality and that kind of stuff, which is another major trope of most noir, is that there's the government's on one side, the rock and the hard place. The government's on one side, the criminal organization's on the other side, and here is our antagonist in the middle with some shady characters on both sides. They don't know who to trust, and they have to make decisions based on their gut instinct regarding what to do, what's best, their personal code kind of thing. So, I love James Ellroy. Everything James Ellroy wrote is amazing. He's got more coming out, and I'm excited about it. So,
yeah, for sure.
But you're more of a drawing a blank on what's the author you always kind of talk about?
Raymond Chandler.
Raymond Chandler,
yeah. Raymond Chandler is he's definitely like my noir exemplar, right? The guy could turn a phrase. I'm not kidding when I say he makes my skin shiver with his prose. He writes things like, she was a blonde to make a bishop kick through a stained glass window. Like who thinks like that? But it's beautiful.
A guy who's known a lot of bishops, obviously.
maybe he's familiar with a lot of bishops. I don't know. But it's like, stuff like that where you just drink it in. One of my favorite ones of his was, and I'm going to mess it up unless I look it up, but it's like, he goes on along the lines of, I needed a break. I needed some sleep. I needed a vacation. I needed $1 million and a house on the hill. What I had was a hat, a coat, and a gun. I put them on and went out to work. Like with prose like that,
and everybody's felt that way.
Yeah,
garbage man to neurosurgeon. Everybody's felt
yes,
that way.
We have all felt that way. Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to that very tight point of view where you're like, yeah, bro, I feel you. I know exactly where you're coming from with that. But it's so evocative. Chandler was. So I think I fell in love with noir before I knew what it was, but once I started like, oh, there's a name for this, and oh, okay. And Chandler was one of the first noir novelists that I picked up and started reading, and so yeah, he's my favorite. So he's perpetually on the list of people that I'd like people. If you could have lunch with anybody dead or alive, like Raymond Chandler's on my list.
So one thing I noticed, and you talked about this, and it sort of fits with my understanding of noir, is that it was generated out of post-war hardship, but mostly the hardship. And if you look at the people who was coming out of that war, they also survived in living memory the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. So do you think that noir has to come from that place of people who have experienced that? And do you think it can continue in a economy that isn't struggling? Do you think that genre aesthetics will appeal to people when times are good?
Yes, I do. But I think it's going. I'm trying to decide if you could do like a legit, hero's journey type story where you have the young hero starts knowing nothing, very unspoiled, and have it be a legit noir story. And I think you could, but you'd have to kind of.
It's going to be a longer story.
It's going to be a much longer story, and you're going to have to some of the things that the typical noir hero does for himself. You're going to have other characters to do for this young hero if you're going to do it, because again, it all comes back to that feeling of understanding that there is light and there is shadow in the world. There is good and there is evil. There is duality in everything. And you can't have one without the other. And that's not an understanding that we're necessarily born with or have when we're young and innocent and someone else is taking care of all of the things for us. You know what I mean? Like you kind of have to have a little bit of experience of the world to really grok that on a deep personal level. Well, and
one of the things about, there's generally, unless we're talking about like a Star Trek universe, there is no uniformity of economic wealth.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some reason you could set it in that, they didn't get along very well or they had a hard time of it. One of the better examples from that is more as a modern kind of noir story, but may not tick all of the boxes, but is Denzel Washington, Training Day. Take this guy who's experienced, he's a cop, he knows what he's doing, and he gets put into this environment, and now all of a sudden everybody's frankly a shitbag. Not just the guys they're after, but the guy that he's working with and the people that he's training. He has to figure a way out of this, and he's being set up to fail and everything else like that. So, but again, that's more of a, it's certainly modern. It's within the last decade, I believe. And so it has that.
Oh. Go ahead.
Oh.
So it has that ethos of, or the current economic strata where it's, we've had a better time of it than say the Greatest Generation back in, that survived through the Depression and World War II. But, if you can find the setting for it. But yeah, you're right. It requires one of the things about it usually is that the protagonist is a human being who has some experience and may or may not have been abused by that experience.
Yeah.
And they've learned things from that experience that have informed their code, informed the way they respond to the world, which is why the first person narrative or the very close third person narrative are really essentials, because you get into their head as to why they're responding the way they are to what's going on. So I think
other thing too,
I was actually.
So here's my here's my academic background in English literature coming out to play, right? Like you have to impose. This is one of the things also that I really like about noir is because it isn't. You can't. You have to do finagling to do a Marxist read on it, right? It isn't about class struggle. It isn't. It's about the fact that humanity within ourselves has that dichotomy, that discrepancy between, our good impulses and our bad impulses. So it doesn't matter if, you're at the top of the economic strata or at the bottom, or if there is no economic strata and everything's very like level playing field. within the setting of your story. If your characters are human, and even if they're human analogs who are aliens, if they're well-rounded characters, they're gonna have both light and dark to their personalities, and that is the place where that shadow and light metaphor really points to, I think.
So I guess what I was asking was less about the universe itself, because obviously if the author is creative, any situation can work.
Yeah.
What I was asking was more, at least Casey and Griffin and I are of enough of an age that we have living memory of people that survived the Great Depression, even if they died when we were young. And so do you think someone who doesn't have that visceral knowledge of suffering and hardship can understand enough of what noir is to actually competently write it?
So I'm going to be very presumptuous.
Point at Hinckley here.
Yeah, and I'm going to. So Hinckley is, how old are you now, hon? 22?
22, yeah.
Yeah, Hinckley's 22 years old. She's grown up in a great family. That's not to say that she hasn't struggled, but because she has. Everyone does, but she's grown up in a great family. She's always had a secure home, always had enough to eat. And she wrote a fantastic noir story where the characters do have, that knowledge that just because I have these things doesn't mean that everyone else has these things.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
But
well,
she has the living knowledge of, oh, go ahead. Well, but that goes back to, she didn't have to, nobody has to suffer it themselves if they have the living knowledge, and her dad did not grow up in a lap of luxury. So she has that connection to what it is to not do well, if that
So
makes sense.
are you asking me if a third generation millionaire could write a noir story?
Yes. Do you think it would be believable?
Yes, I think so. Because here's the thing. Everybody struggles. Yeah, everybody has struggle. The hardest thing that you have ever done is still the hardest thing that you have ever done, And if you are creative enough and observant enough, and you're interested enough in the noir genre, you're going to seek out knowledge that's going to inform that type of story for you. I mean, if you want to get right down to brass tacks, I came from a upper middle class family household. My parents both came from upper middle class households. Their parents both came from upper middle class households for the time that they were in. I love the genre because, again, it reflects the truth of human nature, that for all of us there is light and there is shadow.
I think another part about writing noir, for me at least, is that I have the advantage of being not sheltered, if that makes sense. Because my parents have very much have all kind of always treated me like an adult, where it's if we have conversations at the dinner table about stuff like economics and stuff like that, and I know a lot of people who have had different struggles about finances or different parts of or struggles with their family or other things like that. So I think that that's one of the more important things, is to just
and being able to just be empathetic enough to put yourself in another person's shoes. It's kind of easy to figure out, and especially when you're driven as a big consumer of a certain genre, or genre that is so well illustrated. But anime is really, really carefully defined roles, and there's a lot of playing with those roles and the characters and that kind of thing. But it is, one of the things that my daughter is of a generation with Hinckley, a few years younger, but same thing. They pick this stuff up by observing the quality of the shows that they have. When Casey and I were growing up, there weren't a lot of shows out there that we could watch to get a really good grip on science fiction genre stuff anyway. Because most of it was played down or played, stupid. as opposed to, hey, we're just making this awesome thing for everyone. And that's one of the coolest things about this, I think, is, in any writing, I've never been a drug addict. So, but I can still write about a drug addict from their point of view, because I have tried to, put my mindset where they're at, that kind of thing.
But you've worked with them in your civilian job, which gives you that exposure. I think, again, you've got the hands-on.
But
so
I haven't.
I've got, before we go to
and I've done the same thing. It really is about observation and learning,
Yeah. All right. Well, I was going to ask Hinkley a question. We're going to pause that since she lost her connection for a second. And Griffin, if you could do us the honor of the commercial read, because this is the anthology all three of you are in. So how could we not make it the sponsor?
Oh,
and I still love that cover.
The audiobook cover instead of the full effect of
the cover.
Of the full cover. She's a very shapely cover model.
All right. Well, while he's doing the read, I will get that and we will fix this.
Noir Fatale. Fate is the ultimate dark lady. Noir, the silky note of a saxophone. The echoes of a woman's high heels down a deserted asphalt street. Steam rising from city vents. A man with a gun. A dame with a problem. The femme fatale. She's got a siren song that has lured many away from the light and into the dark underbelly of society. It's a place where the doing the right thing doesn't necessarily mean you get the big bucks or the girl. You do the right thing anyway, knowing the truth. Women twist the knife deeper. Here are tales haunted by that compelling and dangerous female archetype. From straightforward hard-boiled detective story to dark urban fantasy to the dirty secrets of a futuristic science fiction, all told with the hot, gritty, and passion-filled dark vision Noir is famous for. All new stories by Laurel K. Hamilton, David Weber, Larry Correa, Robert Buettner, Sarah A. Hoyt, Mike Massa, Casey Ezell, Griffin Barber, Hinkley Correa, and more.
Thanks, Griff. That was good.
You.
It started a little.
And for those of us who've been, you did good. And for those of us who've been part of many and more pairings, we appreciate you adding a little emphasis to that. I'm sure they're grateful. So before we lost you for a second, Hinkley, one of the things I wanted to ask is, so we mentioned, or to piggyback on what Casey was saying, with experience required to sort of make this believable. Do you feel like growing up working, because your dad has talked publicly that you helped him as a kid with his business. You've gone to the cons with him. You've worked as customer service, and I swear customer service can beat the soul out of anyone. So I mean, that's already a start. Do you feel like that affects your ability to put yourself in the characters you're writing in a setting like Noir?
Yeah, because it's one of the big things I think about, like, the detectives, the main characters, is that they're all, like, workers. Like, they're all willing to go out and do the job that most people do not want to do. If it's not out of personal obligation, it's because of they got to pay rent, and, like, I have been there.
And also, any kind of customer service job, you're going to get a rapid appreciation of just what gaping buttholes people can be. Even the nicest person that might be otherwise just great, when their toes are tread upon or they feel that their rights are being infringed, oh boy, does the butthole come out.
Having worked my way through college doing customer service, that's absolutely true of most of humanity.
Yeah.
Rights
All right.
being infringed is putting it nicely.
So are there common tropes or... Go ahead.
Oh, normally it's just coupons, but...
This is true. That's a whole new subset of humanity. Like, if you want to put an archetype, the couponer would be up there. We might have to do a podcast on the Fireside Chat on archetypes of people. But speaking of back to Noir, do you think there are common tropes that are either have to be there or just are intrinsic to the genre?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. But I want to hear Hinkley's answer first.
Well,
Sorry,
really
girl.
enjoy.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
But she will.
You're good. Yeah, I think there are tropes that definitely exist that, like, they're not required, but they kind of find their way into a noir story. Like, there's always going to be a detective or somebody who's searching out the mystery, and there's always going to be bad guys and crime and moral ambiguity. And like just and there's always like rain and bad weather.
Oh, yeah. That's not something I didn't even talk about, but yeah, the atmosphere of it
Yeah.
is one of the big things. And again, how they accomplished that in the early noir films was, oh, it's raining, great.
Yeah.
That foreshortens the scene. It's it covers up a lot of the blemishes in the background or the anachronisms or anything else like that. We can get rid of it by having rain in the background and just the one light.
Yeah, I agree. Could you tell a noir story without any of the tropes? I would say no, because it wouldn't be a noir story. It
wouldn't be identifiable anyway.
Yeah, it would be some other kind of story.
Yeah.
It's like saying, can you tell a romance story without any interpersonal relationships? Not really, because it's different kind of story then, Can you tell a noir story without using all of the tropes? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And can you subvert them and use them in new and interesting ways? Absolutely. Once again, look at Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right? The femme fatale in that one is a classic, archetypical femme fatale. And yet she's 100% loyal to her husband. And, she has that great line about, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way, which is exactly how you make it work for a kid's show, for a kid's movie, which is, believe it or not, what it is, even though it's also great for adults. So, yeah.
No. I'm not a huge fan.
You didn't like Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I didn't say that. I said I'm just not a huge fan. For me, it was a little too much. I like my anime to be anime and my real people to be real people.
Okay.
But having said that, yeah, it used those just fiercely and continuously, repeatedly, and the kind of murky things that were going on within the causing and causality and responses for the people of the characters was all there.
Yeah,
absolutely is. I just visually it was too jarring for me.
That's fine. You're allowed to have your own opinion, Griff.
I know.
And you have her permission to say so.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, there's been I introduced, I think Casey, I introduced her to Mulholland Falls.
Great movie.
Which is it is straight up the closest we've come to noir, to my mind, in the modern films, which is part of the reason why it hasn't gotten much play. Because at the end, he doesn't get the gal. He doesn't. He basically all he has left is this job. His friends are either dead or dying. It's just really pretty miserable ending. But he did everything the way he said he was going to do it, and he got to the core of the mystery and dealt with that core of that mystery. But now he's left with the fallout from it. Mm-hmm. Despite the incredible personal cost of what he's doing, he still did it anyway. And for me, that's the biggest single trope is that, again, personal cost, regardless of that cost, according to a code, doing the right thing. And in his case, he's trying to do the right thing, even though the initiating instance was doing the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. So it's really, you can use a lot of the tropes. And just as Casey said, if you don't use some of them, no problem. And really, a lot of it boils down to how people make the connections in their heads, right?
Yeah.
You leave it for them to decide how it all really worked out.
I think for me, the most essential thing in a noir story has got to be the acknowledgement that no one's ever perfectly clean. None of the characters are ever completely without ulterior motive.
We're all pure as the driven snow.
Right. I mean, there are degrees, certainly, because you can have innocence in a noir story, but certainly your protagonist, your main character, and the most important side characters, I think, have to have some of that same light and shadow, and I sound like I'm repeating myself, but it's just such a perfect metaphor. And I think that's one of the reasons also why I love the genre so much, is because you get that visual metaphor every time you watch a noir film or a noir anime, or every time you read a noir story and the author is telling you about the lines of shadow that cross across the woman's face as a car passes by the office window.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we haven't really touched on is that it's also kind of one of the things about it is it's a little bit of an intensely urban genre as well.
Yeah.
It tends to, in many of the cases, the city becomes a character in and of itself, or that urban environment, the neighborhood kind of thing. Chinatown, and again, LA Confidential, all of James Ellroy's stuff set in LA is all about that.
Yeah.
And the character and the police department, they all kind of evolve as the years go by, and as the stories go through. But yeah, and I can't remember who there's some Vegas ones too.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing where it's it's obvious what's going on there is the city is a character because it informs like how people talk, that kind of thing too. So.
In Max Allan Collins is a very famous mystery writer, and he's got a long-running, terrific noir series called, I think it's called the Nate Heller Mysteries, but the main character is Nate Heller, and he's a Chicago detective starting in like the 20s and going forward from there. And one of the things, speaking of the versatility of noir, one of the things that he does that's really interesting with this series is the mysteries in each book are actual real life unsolved mysteries. Like who killed what's the guy's name? Anton Chermak or Cermak? I don't know how to say it, but he was a mayor of Chicago who was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone was arrested and went to prison for the murder, but almost everyone agrees that guy was just a patsy, like just a scapegoat. So
politics at its best.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
The killer.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that kind of thing that, like, because the undercurrent and the underbelly of society and structure is so much at play, like Griffin said, it lends itself to that urban environment, and it's so unique to each individual urban environment. So Nate Heller's mysteries couldn't take place in anywhere other than Chicago, because you're dealing with Capone, and you're dealing with, Frank Needy, and you're dealing with, that whole
and Hinckley's story doesn't work outside of urban Japan.
No. Yeah. It's, it works in Tokyo. That's where it has to be, so, that's exactly why for our third noir anthology that we're working on, the focus of it is actually the archetype of the noir city, and how do we work the city into those, in our case, science fiction and fantasy, noir stories. So a little teaser for you.
So sounds good. We'll have to have you back to talk about that anthology when it comes out. So we'll start with you, Hinckley. Do you have a favorite trope when you're writing or reading noir stories?
Personally, I really like I said, like the bad weather. Like bad weather and like neon lighting. Because those just are cool together, but I feel like those are some of like the bigger, like some big atmospheric parts. I feel like the atmosphere.
So how do you differentiate that from the same thing you get out of Cyberpunk? The neon lighting and the bad weather.
Well, sometimes they're not too far apart. It's just kind of setting.
Yeah, some cyberpunk is noir, very noir.
Okay.
Yeah, I would argue that
Okay.
cyberpunk is another subgenre of noir. Honestly.
Okay.
It certainly
What
has
about you,
its
Griff?
own.
Do you have a favorite? Yeah.
I
Do you
think
have a
I've already
favorite?
declared it. I've already declared it. It's basically my favorite is has to do with the regardless of the cost, I'm going to adhere to these values and do what I consider to be the right thing. It may not be the legal thing. It may not even be the moral thing for the rest of society. But for me, according to my guidelines and the way I want to live my life and how I'll be able to sleep with myself or not, or the love I bear for the person that I'm trying to save from the situation, it's all good. I love that. And that, because that's what reality is like. You make your decisions and you have to live with them. You have to continue on despite what it is you're feeling or how you feel that you might have gotten a raw deal. You just got to continue going on, making your decisions the best way you know how. And that for me is a healthy exploration as a writer of those concerns and difficulties in life.
Okay. What about you, Casey? Do you have a favorite trope when you're reading or writing noir?
So I kind of, oh my gosh, hang on, I forgot how to breathe. Excuse me, sorry. Oh, excuse me 1 second. I'm so sorry, guys.
You are absolutely okay. Getting used to the allergens of America is probably taking some changes for you.
Yeah. No. Like Griffin said, I kind of already alluded to I'm going to give you two. Okay. One that's on a like story structure overall thematic level, and one that's more like Hinckley's, that where it's like this is a piece of the atmosphere that I like to include. And so the first one, like I said, it was already the recognition that no one in the story is operating purely out of unselfish motives. That everyone has some kind of ulterior motive. Whether that motive is good or bad, or however you want to define that. Nobody's completely upfront about their intentions. I love that because I think that that's very true to humanity. I think we all have our own ulterior motives that we keep very close hold and don't share with anyone, or share with only a select few. So I love to include that. And then the other thing is, I love, well, gosh, it's hard to choose. But one of them is backseam stockings, a femme fatale wearing backseam stockings. You know what I'm talking about when I say that, right? Like the stockings that have the line coming up the back.
Was it that 50s aesthetic?
It's very much a thing of that time period, because we don't have to have backseam stockings now. We can buy, stockings that don't have any seams that are visible. But it's that aesthetic is very that, and like the idea of I talked about the shadowy lines across the woman's face, or a fedora brim kind of as a woman is looking down, kind of cutting across her face, which the more I'm thinking about it, the more those things kind of go together, because the lines across the face really do indicate that like something's not right, something is untrue or inauthentic about this individual. So sorry, I'm getting all English majory again on you, but
we've all got to recover from our days as English majors. I get it. It's absolutely okay. I'm a recovering English major too. I feel you, Casey. So what about character archetypes? We don't have time for a lot more, so this is gonna be the last one from me, and I'll let you guys go. Are there any common character archetypes that are required, or at least common in noir?
Well, I mentioned already the antagonist. There are some that are helpful, right? And Hinckley said the investigator, the character who's trying to find out what's going on. And it doesn't have to be a private eye, but that is the sine qua non of the trope. This is that they're going to be a private investigator and drink too much, smoke too much, and don't have enough sleep, and probably used to be a member of the department, that kind of thing. But yeah, there has to be an investigator. There has to be somebody that kind of fills those shoes, I think.
A truth seeker. Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I'm a fan of characters who their like faction doesn't match up with their morals, like corrupt cops or like good gang members.
Yes. Yeah, I like that.
That's very cool, yeah.
Yeah. So my favorite character archetype in all of Noir is the femme fatale, because I think that she's just, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating representation of a woman with her own motives, who in a lot of cases, most cases, I would say, is willing to do pretty much whatever it takes to achieve her desired ends, whatever they happen to be.
And has her own power on all the levels.
Yeah.
And uses all of them on all the levels to do what it is that they want to do.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, that's the reason why, we started this whole anthology journey, is because I was like, hey, I really like this character. Let's get a bunch of stories about her, in all her different incarnations. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
I think the interpretations of the femme fatale is also super neat, because like just within Noir Fatale, like everybody had a wildly different interpretation of the femme fatale. Like some were bad guys, some were the protagonists, some were like undoubtedly good guys.
Yes, yeah.
And some were bad guys and the protagonists, and still, but they had reasons for doing what they were doing.
Yeah. Bob Buettner's femme fatale was a 13-year-old girl, and it was brilliant. It was brilliantly done. Hinckley's femme fatale blew me away. It was so good. Yeah. So
if you're as curious as I am how a 13-year-old girl can fit the trope of the femme fatale, you need to go check this anthology out. So I will link it as a show sponsor in the show notes. So check it out, because now I'm curious too.
It's so good.
But so I think part of it is you understand, like, this is where, I triple majored in English history and poli-sci. So you get the sort of total package of where the film genre came from that spawned everything else. And the femme fatale was really a woman clawing her agency out of a more patriarchal time. So it sort of makes sense. How do you carry that forward in a more egalitarian society?
There's always going to be women with ulterior motives, just as there's always going to be men with ulterior motives. And regardless of how egalitarian our society ever gets, as long as there are people who are physically, sexually attracted to a woman, there will be women willing to use her ability to attract people's attention for those means, in support of those motives that she is keeping under wraps. And I think the same is true of men, but we're talking about the femme fatale. So I thought of another trope though, JR. Can I backtrack just a little
Absolutely.
bit? One of the things that we didn't mention is probably of pretty a fair amount of interest to your listeners specifically, is that most of these heroes, these sort of anti-hero gray knight types that we talk about in No Game for Knights, that end up being the protagonists of these noir stories, most of them are military veterans or war veterans of some kind. So you have people who are way more comfortable with violence as, just a facet of life than your quote unquote normal everyday person would be. And I think that informs a lot of the narratives that we see in the genre too, because once you understand that, you're like, oh, okay.
I think it was Raymond Chandler that was talking about writing, and he said that when you're stuck, that's when the guys with guns burst in.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of like, hey, I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but I'll just insert this action sequence here, and how the characters respond to violence is going to inform what I'm doing. I'm not sure if that was Chandler, but I think it was.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think it was.
But the veterancy aspect of it is also one of those things that is intrinsic to it, because it happens to be part of what informs what they are now, and how they interact with their environment and their world, and challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So I've been promising you, dear listener, dear viewers, that we try to keep the episodes from going long. And I know that's been especially hard since to date, our longest episode ever is Casey at clocking in at 2.5 hours. I didn't think anyone would beat the good Mr. Dr. Cannon, but you beat him by 3 seconds. So mazel tov. But before we let you go, we want a fun question. I had fun, so we wanted a fun question for the road. So thinking about either ones you've written or ones you've consumed, of all the noir universes, are there any you'd be willing to live in, since some of them are pretty dark places?
We already do.
Okay. Griffin?
I probably wouldn't mind living in Last Stop Station's world. It's got its its problems, but that kind of advanced technology and being in contact with alien races and stuff like that would be pretty cool to me.
Okay, Hinkley.
I could cheat and say the whole Marlowe, Raymond Chandler, because it's just now. It's just our universe now, so it probably wouldn't be too different.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We already live in a noir universe. It's just some people recognize it and some don't.
All right, on that happy note, we're going to let you tell us where listeners and viewers can find you on the Wild Wilder interwebs, and we're going to just go round robin. Hinkley, where can they find you if they want to find out more about what you're doing?
For right now, it's just Facebook at Hinkley Korea and on Instagram at Audio Porpoise.
I do dig a porpoise, so that's I'm digging it. All right, and those links will be in the show notes. Next, Mr. Griffin Barber.
So the links are going to be at the end of this. So, but on the internet, generally, I'm on Facebook quite a bit. I'm on Twitter infrequently, and I have anthology work coming out December 8th. I've got a story in World's Long Lost, which is an homage to a friend of mine who passed away last year. And I actually worked in another friend who passed away the year before that. And I worked in a mutual friend of Casey and I, Tara Urbanek. She paid for a Tuckerization. And I put her in. She's a chief, a Space Navy chief, and comes to an end there. And then I've got the third story that I wrote for the City That Never Sleeps. What is it? City Never Sleeps?
Down These Mean Streets.
Yeah, Down These Mean Streets was the third noir anthology that Casey's putting together, and Larry are putting together. And I have another petty necromancy story in there with my necromancer protagonist from the Noir Fatale story.
You guys, it is so good. It is so good. She is such a killer femme fatale, which is, I guess, redundant, but there you have it.
All right, and last but not least, Miss Casey Ezel, can you tell listeners and viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website at caseyezel.net or .com. Either one will get you there. Highly recommend you go there. And then there's a link for like free stories. And then that link will take you to a newsletter website or newsletter sign up page. So you can sign up for my newsletter where you'll get updates from me weekly about what's going on, what I'm writing. You'll also, you can find me on YouTube at Casey Ezel Writer Life. And I'll do, again, videos about my life as a writer there. I'm also on Instagram at Casey Ezel and Facebook at Casey Ezel. So.
And if the sponsor was interesting to you, if the Noir Fatale anthology, there is still time to order before Christmas. So you have the rest of the month, people. So do your part and give a gift of eternal knowledge by letting people read. So, and I'll try to think of something wittier to say next time when I tell you to buy books for people because it's good for them. But you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion and you have more questions for the guests, or you have more questions you want us to ask where we maybe do a round 2 on Noir, be sure to do that in the discussion section on the Facebook group. Or you can email the show, or you can comment when it posts on YouTube, but participate. We love it when you do. We have a website at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where you can help support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on, or you can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts, the absentee Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes. So on that happy note, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the absentee Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you guys for coming. This was a lot of fun. You made my job easy.
Thanks, JR.
Thanks.
Thank you.